Today on Professor Tom's Philosophy in 10, a visit to Credulousland. A visit to Credulousland. The most curious of the communities on the continent of the skeptics might just be Credulousland. You may have even wondered, why are they there? The rest of the continent is dotted with the communities of various kinds of skeptics, but the inhabitants of Credulousland are skeptical of nothing. No matter what you assert is true, they agree. Surely they don't belong on a continent otherwise covered by doubters of so many various kinds. Your puzzlement about this situation is well warranted. More than once, I have heard skeptics from all of the other four lands preaching in the streets of Credulousland. This is almost a rite of passage among the younger skeptics. After they have gained complete proficiency in the arguments of their hometowns, many a young radical skeptic, many a young skeptic of the senses, and many skeptics of religious experience will travel to Credulousland to spend a gap year talking earnestly with the credulous in an invariably failed attempt to get them to admit to and to take responsibility for their epistemological sins. And it's always the same with these would-be skeptical reformers. They arrive with full confidence in their arguments and beliefs. They find the citizens of Credulousland more than pleasant and more than accepting. The evangelist of skepticism then walks them through ironclad arguments, demonstrating with adamantine philosophical certainty that the senses cannot be trusted, or that we have no knowledge of logic, or that their gods don't exist, or perhaps that knowledge itself is not possible. And how do the affable people of Credulousland respond? They respond, always, with enthusiasm. They agree with everything. They invariably beam with utter sincerity and affirm everything the skeptical crusader has to say, crowds of them shaking each other's hands with vigorous pleasure upon learning truths that to them are now obvious. And invariably, the young skeptics then congratulate themselves on doing what none of their peers had been able to do, even after centuries of trying. For the young skeptical crusaders are at this point convinced that they have truly converted the affable, if confused, locals. Now, you'd think it would not be so, but funnily enough, having people enthusiastically agree with everything you say all of the time, no matter what, is tiring. It's actually frustrating. It's especially frustrating when your new converts don't seem to behave any differently. In fact, the citizens' invariable universal agreement gradually but surely wears down the enthusiasm of the champions of skepticism until that very agreeableness starts to irk, and then gall, and then infuriate. "These exasperating citizens of Credulousland," they exclaim, "why do they say that they agree with us in all particulars and without reservation, and yet nothing here ever changes?" And here I must confess that I, too, in my youth, was one of the great army of the champions of skepticism, and I, like so many others, was cocksure enough to think that I would succeed where so many others had failed. I was disabused of this belief quickly enough by the unending geniality of my hosts, and it was at least not so callous to ask one of them with whom I thought I had become great friends the great and frustrating question of the evangelist: why, if they agreed with everything I said, did they not change their behaviors and migrate to another part of the continent? My friend, his name incidentally was Pistos Epimetheos, my friend Pistos explained it this way. Have you ever noticed that pretty much everyone believes logically contradictory things? They don't ordinarily notice it, but when they do become aware that they believe two things that can't both be true, they usually try to figure out a way to continue believing both of them. Seriously. The logical thing to do, of course, would be to reject or at least modify one of the two beliefs to bring them in line with each other. But that's not what most people do. They like what they believe and will contort themselves in the most repulsive ways to hang on to their beliefs. For example, one visitor to our land was insistent that there is no contradiction in supporting capital punishment for some crimes, but in being pro-life in all other matters. Pro-life not just about abortion, but about war and even killing in self-defense. This visitor believed that it's always wrong to kill a human being. They claimed to be completely committed to non-violence, and yet they also believed that the death penalty is a proper punishment for murder. My look must have conveyed skepticism, of course. Pistos continued. How did they square these claims, you are wondering? Well, they argued that an execution for murder is not actually properly understood as killing a person. It's merely giving effect to that person's own choice. They chose to murder someone, and in so choosing, they chose their own death. This odd visitor actually argued that it would be wrong not to execute the murderer, because that would be failing to respect the murderer's autonomy and free will as a moral being. At this point, I agreed that that seemed quite contradictory, and again, Pistos continued. Or let me give you another example. Have you ever noticed that many authors will write in their book's preface that any mistakes or errors in their book are entirely their own, and yet by publishing the book, they're also asserting that they believe that they have made only true assertions in the book. So they seem to be committed to two contradictory beliefs. They believe with good reason that everything they've written in the book is true, and they believe, also for very good reasons, that the book contains falsehoods. My dear friend, I am old, Pistos went on, and I've conversed with many, many skeptics over the years, and I, like many here in Credulousland, have come to realize that human beings are walking bags of contradictions. Not just a few here and there that mostly don't get in the way of things. No, most people are so freighted with contradictions that it's a wonder they can get out of bed in the morning, much less function. Now, here's the funny thing about contradictions. If a single contradiction is true, then everything is true. If you don't believe me, then see if you can follow my reasoning. I perked up when I heard this. Finally, my friend Pistos Epimetheos was going to explain. Suppose you believe a contradiction. It doesn't matter what it is. Any contradiction at all will do. Since you are just a giant bag of logical contradictions, don't frown at me. You are as human as anyone else here. Since you are a giant bag of human contradictions, a human being replete with contradictory beliefs, I think we can be assured that we'd find a suitable contradiction quickly enough if we looked. So, suppose you believe a contradiction. Logical contradictions ultimately assert that both something and its opposite are true. Like this. Here Pistos took out a wax-covered tablet and proceeded to scratch out a numbered sentence on it with a small stick. A and not A. Now, it's a funny thing about and statements, which philosophers call logical conjunctions, Pistos continued. They assert that both sides of the and are true. So if line 1 here is true, then the following must be true as well. And here Pistos scratched out the following. Line 2, A. Of course, if both A and not A are true, then A by itself must be true. Now check this out. If A is true, then A or anything else must also be true. Let's call that anything else X, like this. Line 3, A or X. Of course, looking back at line number 1, we can also say that not A must be true. So line 4 then just says not A. And there it is, exclaimed Pistos. Just look at lines 3 and 4. What together do they tell you? They tell you that X must be true, like this. Line 5, X. So, from this line of reasoning, we can only conclude that if any contradiction is true, then anything and everything, call it X, must also be true. Pistos then concluded a triumphant light in his eyes, and since everyone holds contradictory beliefs, they must agree with us and also assent to the claim that all statements, all claims whatsoever must be true. I could feel myself slipping into a dreamy state as Pistos Epimetheos spoke. Of course all statements must be true. It follows with absolute logical necessity from any contradiction, and I would be a fool to think that any human being ever walked the earth who didn't hold contradictory things to be true, including myself. Mustering my last bit of mental energy, however, I hastened to point out one flaw in his reasoning. Aren't you relying on truths of logic to reach your conclusion? After all, you were saying that to be logically consistent, people must embrace all claims, even false ones, because they already hold at least one pair of contradictory beliefs. And as a matter of logic, that means they're committed to all beliefs no matter what. Shouldn't they just reject and resolve any such contradictions they find in their beliefs? Oh, congratulations, my friend! What perspicacity! What sagaciousness, said Pistos Epimetheos. I so agree with you. I have never heard anything more true in my life.